Welcome to FP&A Fast Track, your source for FP&A resources to put your career on the fast track. Welcome, everybody. I have another great guest with me here today on FP&A Fast Track, Carolina Lago, who is the Managing Director of Tactic Financial. She's an FP&A financial modeling specialist with extensive experience working in FP&A for some large organizations like Educational Testing Service, Avon, several others, and now also works with smaller and mid-sized companies. And with that, Carolina, tell us a little bit more about what you're focused on the most right now in your business.
Oh, hi, John. Thank you for having me today. To answer your question, my biggest focus right now, I've been working with small and medium companies, trying to organize their finances, but mostly focused on financial modeling and corporate training as well. So I decided to put a course. That's my baby right now. I'm trying to put together all the material, and it's going to be a very special one. A course for individual course for the public. The same type of course that I already do for corporations, I'll do for the public. So it's an amazing opportunity to have this instead of being inside the organization, you can do on your own to put together a financial model from scratch with all the best practices on the market, like the global best practice on the market, and to make it really dynamic, really working, and will be a way to develop your financial skills. So that's what I've been working on mostly lately.
Great. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But before we do that, I like to get a little bit of context on you as a person, not just as the financial modeler. Can you tell us a little bit about, you've worked at some large companies. You're in France now, right? But
Yes.
I see in your background, you have a little bit of an international
Yeah.
resume, so to speak. I'm curious, tell us a little bit about how working in different companies and different organizations has shaped your experience in finance and FP&A.
Well, I started my career in Brazil. I graduated in business in Brazil 20 years ago. So I started a career there and with a large corporation, a banking corporation, financial services. It was a company that took care, just for you to understand the size of it and the importance of it, took care of all the MasterCard transactions in Brazil. So back then, it was just two acquirers of credit card, and one took care of Visa, the other one took care of MasterCard. So it was huge amount of transactions monthly. You can imagine Brazil with its size. For a company that was not so large in terms of amount of employees, so we could do a little bit of everything. It was a financial team of 20 to 30 people. We could do a little bit of everything. We could be involved those things. And then with that company, I was able to participate in the IPO, helping them to, as a financial planning on the background, I was able to help them putting together reports and participate with the IPO. And it was an amazing experience to see this from the beginning, see a department of investor relation being born. So it was amazing, and it really shaped a lot my career. And a little bit of that financial model background I got from there, because when I started working there, all the models were in Excel. We had SAP, but we didn't have any financial planning, and all the models in Excel, and they work amazingly. The process was very rounded, nothing went wrong. But then we went on to make implementation of cognitive planning, and I was the leader of that project. So that's when I started to put together my financial modeling skills, because I had to translate everything that was working so fine in Excel to cognitive planning. After
Cognitive-
that, just to keep going on my personal professional path, I moved to US, accompanying my husband that was moving there. So I worked for 10 years in ETS, Educational Testing Services, which is like an, another type of service, completely different, nonprofit, but a huge company that does all the tests. I don't know if everybody is familiar. It does all the tests, the TOEFL, the SAT. It's very known, especially in US.
Mhm.
But it was amazing to work there too, because the process were also very different. And I got to be a lot of business partnering with different areas of the company. I went through procurement, IT department, IT finance. And it was amazing to be able to experience every little piece of that. And then I moved to France. So now, also completely different, I am supporting small and medium companies to organize their finances and putting in place all this knowledge that I've been collecting for, especially for financial modeling and FP&A, to make sure that small and medium companies also have access to that, because it's not very common that they have access. They usually don't have a big team to put that in place and to do analysis and to understand their numbers. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, so for some perspective, when I worked at Royal Caribbean years ago, our FP&A department was only there were less than 10 of us, I think, right? So if you think of a company as big as Royal Caribbean and a
Yeah,
department that small, just imagine medium-sized companies, they're not gonna have anywhere near the resources to be able to have a team like that. So the type
exactly.
of thing that you're doing is invaluable to these organizations. I would guess that part of the challenge might just be an awareness that someone like yourself is available with all that
Yeah.
experience that they can then bring in maybe at a fractional level if you're doing consulting.
Exactly,
Um,
because most of the times those companies, they don't need a full-time person to do. They have
mhm.
fairly simple process, but they don't have anybody capable of understanding the numbers and actually taking decisions with the numbers. It's not only understanding and giving reports, but actually managing to guide them through the next few years. How and sometimes it's profitable companies, but they are just wasting time and not growing properly because they just don't know how to do it. They don't know how to take the right decisions.
So a couple of things that came up for me as you were talking about your background. You mentioned Cognos, and that immediately made me think of TM1,
Yeah.
which I got introduced to when I worked at AutoNation. It was the first time I was ever exposed to something that was kind of next level from Excel, right?
Mhm.
And there was someone was trying to explain the whole cube concept to me. Now, this is a long time ago. This is more than 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
this is from someone who worked in spreadsheets since before Excel. I used Lotus 123 way back in the day before Excel even came onto the scene. So
Yeah.
this whole idea of a cube, what do you mean by a cube? Can you talk a little bit about just the concept, not necessarily specifically that product, but there's lots of products now that
Yeah.
use that same sort of structure.
Yeah, the planning software usually, if you implement it well, it will give you a structure, and especially you in larger organizations, it makes a lot easier to continue the budget process and to have everybody uh, doing budgets at the right way. So we can consolidate a budget from all areas of the company, and then you generate reports. And if you do the right connections, you connect with your ERP, and then you have uh, reports that compare actuals to plan, and then you can go on from there and make the analysis. Nowadays, there are more modern software, probably Cognos, TM1 is still a strong player, but there are other modern software like NetSuite, probably, and more focused on also the medium and smaller business. But what I think from all of this is that it gets, how can I say, it gets a little blocked because you depend on the software to take your reports out of it. You cannot be creative with it. So you can now only go as much as Cognos lets you, or Cognos, or any other planning software.
Yeah, whatever the tool.
So that's what I like most about, and Excel has evolved a lot about this. What I like most about having Excel going parallel, even if you do have a fancy software, they cost a fortune to implement. But even if you do have the budget to have a fancy planning software, not only the big ones like Cognos Planning, but the smaller ones like Anaplan, or Anaplan is too big, JDocs, or any of those planning software. If you do have the budget to implement it, even with that, you're still going to use a lot of Excel. And Excel now, it's not only spreadsheets. You can do a cube on Excel too. So we are talking about the cube concept, is that you can see your finances under different dimensions. So it's not only columns and rows. You can actually see it from different dimensions, and that's what makes a cube. You can see columns and rows on different types of business, on different categories, and then you can blend all of them together if you need, or you can slice them. You can drill inside a number, and then you can go on and understand better what compounds that number. And nowadays, with all the evolution, let's say, of Excel, you can actually do that there. So I am more leaning towards using more Excel and Power BI than I was before. Of course, if you are on a company that has the budget to have planning software, maybe you'll keep things more structured. But at the same time, it blocks things. It blocks the creativity.
Yeah.
So I think it's
I,
better to have that in parallel, Power BI and Microsoft Excel.
I found it interesting, and I won't mention company names, but even in doing some training for, I've done training for one company in particular who is a big player in the software space that makes planning software. And
Hmm.
their planning department still does a ton of their work in Excel. They
Yes,
use their own tool that's purpose built for FP&A,
exactly.
but they still do a ton with Excel. And some of it has to do with flexibility, the ease, how quickly they can do it. They're so comfortable that, I mean, most of the people that I know that have worked in Excel for years, they can make Excel do almost anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's the path of least resistance that leads us to do something in Excel where there might be a better tool, but we just need to get this thing done quickly. And
Yeah.
it's not a huge project. It's just a quick report or a quick analysis. And
Yeah.
maybe there's something that does it better, but this is just right now, it just kind of does the trick. Um, One of the other things that I was curious about, you mentioned that you lived in Brazil for years. I grew up in South Florida, and I was a financial advisor for several years. And I started to notice there's a lot of Brazilians that live in South Florida. And when I would sit down with couples and we were doing a financial plan for them, their family,
Mhm.
one of the things we'd always ask about is we'd always want to figure out, well, how much debt do you have? And if you have debt, we want to put together a plan to help you get out of debt. And I noticed consistently that all the Brazilians I sat with would look at me like, when I would ask them about a mortgage, they'd be like, what do you mean, what mortgage? So, the loan that you have on your house. And I found out that culturally, it seems like in Brazil, mortgages are not common like they are in the US. Is that still the case? Or not
No,
as common?
no, it is. I don't know if people probably going to South Florida maybe didn't have a mortgage in South Florida in US. I don't know if the immigrants would be a little adapted.
Different case?
Um, we did have a mortgage before we moved to US, but we sold the apartment, then liquidated,
Was
and then
consu
moved to US, and then did another mortgage there with our house there. So
Okay.
yeah, what I can say, it's a little bit of a cultural change. I can see that Brazilians, they try not to get into so much debt as Americans, so they don't have
So maybe the
as many
consumer debt
credit
isn't
cards. I don't know,
so
because this is changing too. I'm seeing a lot of Brazilians um with huge credit card bills now, and that was not, I don't know if it's the same that with me, but I've seen a lot of
yeah,
them
maybe.
having huge credit card bills. But I think this is more of an American thing of having so many
I would
credit cards.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was curious about. It's more of a culture thing, right? So some of it may be country culture. I'm from a Latin background too. My mom grew up in Panama,
Uh-huh.
and my parents did have a mortgage, but they always they had this mindset of you don't buy anything if you can't pay for it in cash, and it really was more
Yeah.
just a mindset, right? And I
Yeah.
asked about it because I think culture plays into how we do things in business to a large degree.
That is true. That
So,
is true. I don't know if because I was in financial planning since the beginning of my career, most of my adult years, I always planned ahead a lot of what I was going to do. So we
yeah,
do that, we bring that financial planning to our personal lives. I am not specialized in personal
personal
planning,
fun,
personal financial planning, but I can
right?
say that I've done my homework with myself, me and my husband. My husband is also in finance. So we do that a lot in planning ahead what we're gonna do. And especially for us, it's kind of hard. We still have because we move so much we need to take those decisions and we keep living track. Like we have our 401k in US, we have our retirement plan in Brazil, and now we're making a retirement plan in Europe too. So at the end, we're gonna have to try to combine
Talk
all the
about
three.
diversified.
Yes. So it's diversified, but it's also confusing. So yeah, but
Yeah,
I'm not specialized in personal financial planning, but we bring that a little bit from our professional, I think.
yeah. We all tend to bring. You hear a lot of conversations about like the bringing the whole person to work,
Yes,
and whether that's some a conversation you have or not, there's always some element of our personal
that
beliefs
is
or
true.
culture or whatever that that does kind of tend to come to work with us.
Yeah,
So I want to ask you about something. When you and I first connected, you had mentioned something about one of the other podcast episodes, and when I
yeah,
looked at your LinkedIn profile, your the header that you have immediately resonated with me because it's something that I've said like a million times over the years. And the quote that you have on there is, "Data is only useful if it can be transformed into actionable insights."
yes. And
And
that holds so true to me every single day of my life. And it's not only for data. I would say data, reports, noise, actually, information, actually. I take that very seriously for everything. Because let's say for data, for example, there are companies already collecting data from everywhere and they don't know what to do with it. So they're
yeah,
collecting data and they paying for it. They paying for huge data lakes and they don't know what to do with it. So on the other side, there are companies that have very little access to data, very small cases of reports because they don't have how to generate so much, but they have so much clarity of what they want to do and they know exactly what to extract from that data and they can make actually very good decisions about it, even not having access to so much. So
yeah,
it's only useful if you can make insights, and it translates a little bit for information as well. It's as we're talking about the personal side. I've been a person along those 15 years. I love to learn, so I've been doing a bunch of courses. I read a lot.
okay,
I get access to a lot of information, but I was not precisely putting together and collecting that information, managing that information well. I was just absorbing it, enjoying it.
hmm,
I was not writing down. I saw you did another podcast that you were like jotting notes and everything. That's something that I
constant,
usually do all the time. But then already going back to those notes and not only collecting the notes and the information that you come across and the websites that you save and then conversations that you have, but going back to it and making the connection between them.
yeah,
That's something that really changed it for me a couple years ago. And that's why this course is coming up now. It's because I'm putting together information from different places and I'm seeing connection on this and I'm seeing opportunities to just share with people the ideas that I'm having. And
Mhm.
it's the same for data. It's useless if you don't make insights from it. Information is also useless if you don't actually take action on top of it. So it's kind of connecting. That's why this phrase resonates so much for me.
So a couple of things that came up for me when we are talking about that. One of the guests that I had on recently, Sufyan Hamid, he talked about
Yeah.
he specializes in storytelling for finance, right? And so
Yeah, it's great.
he excellent at what he does. And he talked about the framework that he uses that is based on that Minto pyramid principle that started at McKinsey and Company, I don't know,
Yeah.
30, 40 years ago, but it's still being used because it's so effective. And the basic framework is what, so what, now what, right?
Yeah.
What is the piece of data that we're looking at? What is it? So what?
Exactly.
What does it mean? What are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Is it useful? Is there some action we could take? Which would be the now what? Now what do we do? We recognized it. We made some
Yes.
kind of discernment of what it means. So it makes me wonder. Oh, and the thing you mentioned about notes too. I
Yes.
saw a Tim Ferriss video where he talked about the way he takes notes and it completely transformed the way I do it. So I stole his, which is very, very simple. When he takes notes, he always makes a point, and I do it weekly. I don't remember how he does it, but he has an index in the back of
Mhm.
every single notebook. And at
Mhm.
the end of each week, he goes back and he does a first pass where he highlights things that he thinks would be useful to use
Yes.
somewhere. And the first pass, it's just kind of a brainstorm. I'm just identifying it's the what. Then
Mhm.
he goes back with a highlighter or a red pen, and now he's looking for so what. So I thought this might be useful. Now I'm a little bit more honed in on what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
How is that going to inform something else so I can use it to improve something, make something better, move something forward? And the difference it's made for me is like what you were saying before, I would have stacks of journals, but I didn't have any kind of a
It's
framework for looking
impossible to
back.
go back.
They're just piles and piles of writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now with that simple system, now I go to an index that for a notebook like this thing is typically only 3 or 4 pages of
Yeah.
index pages. And then when I go back to each page that's indexed, it's highlighted, there are
Yeah.
notes, and so it's much more useful now.
To
So I'm
take action.
curious. Yeah. So I'm curious in your course, the tactic financial model is the one that I see you talk about in the content that you're putting out. Can you talk a little bit about, before we talk about the specifics of modeling, what are some things that you talk about that have to do with the mindset of how you're approaching it and whatever the framework is that you use to approach financial modeling?
Okay, so as I told you before, something changed a little bit for me in terms of how I was collecting. We were talking about collecting information and putting together information. A couple of years ago, I read a book called How to Build Your Second Brain. And I started to implement this in my life. It's amazing. It totally changed it for me because I started to um, learn where to put my information and work on all the information that I had in terms of projects. So I started to create projects for my own life. And this financial model course came from some information that I was getting from people, and I was talking to people. And in the book, you see if you ever have a chance to read it, then you start to just like you said, you index. Actually, you come across information, and then something sparkles your curiosity. You are going to save only what sparkles your curiosity. You don't need to save hundreds and hundreds of articles. You can
Often
highlight
word
what you
for word
need.
transcripts.
Yes, as long as you can get back to the article, and if you need to go deeper, you can get back to it. So I started to use this approach of gathering information. And for financial modeling, I started to notice a pattern of people that were able to make insights. And I noticed that from my own career too, that after I could master this skill of making a financial model from scratch, not using templates, but doing it myself, having the knowledge, like the modular knowledge that I had for each one of the schedules that compound a three-statement model. And I'm talking about the three-statement model because for me, it's the foundation for all other models. If you don't master this one, it's impossible to be good at the other ones. But when I started mastering and putting together those pieces of the big puzzle, I started to understand that I could make insights. So I started to connect the ideas and talking to people. I started to notice a pattern of people that went through the same aha moment when they finally could put together a three-statement model. So the course comes out from there because I started to notice the need of the people, and I understood that I had a skill, that I had learned a skill along the years that could be taught faster and that could be really useful for people that needed those insights, that needed to be fast thinking in finance. So if you learn how to do the model this way, and I'm not talking about templates, I understand there's a lot of people that teach with templates, but the way I go through the model will make you actually put your brain to work the same way as the model. So when you see another business transaction, a decision, anything like that, you will know right away in your head. It can be on the middle of the meeting. You will know what kind of impact you have because you know the model from the ground
Know
up.
how
You
it
know the
flows.
skeleton of the model. So you don't need to have a model in front of you. You already know what lines it touches. If I change this, what's going to happen? So it's much easier to build that information in your head. So that's how the course was born. I wanted to teach this skill and to develop people with the same skill that I developed for myself.
Yeah. So this, I think for people that have not already had experience with the three statement model, and when we were talking before we started recording, you had mentioned there's lots of people that work in finance that have never
Yes,
built the three statement model.
it's
And that
very common.
it seems surprising to me, but then when I think about it, it shouldn't be because I started out in public accounting and then I went to mergers and acquisitions. So we're doing valuation models and we have
Mhm.
to look at all three statements, right? So I kind of grew up in that same thinking. But
Yes.
even when I left the day to day of being in Excel and working in models, the value it gave me is what you just pointed out. In a conversation, you're building those, you're starting to understand the relationships of the model in the spreadsheet that
Mhm.
now is starting to build these models in your mind.
Yes,
So
and
your
even if you use
conception-wise,
a planning, if even if you use a planning software, like you said, you create that in Excel sheet and then it translates to your mind. That's why it's so useful. A lot of people come to me and say, "Why do I need to do this in Excel? I have company planning, I have NetSuite, I have whatever software in my company. We don't use Excel for building financial models. Why do I need this? It's for you.
well,
It's a skill."
yeah, it's developing the mental muscle, right?
Exactly.
And it takes some
Yes.
repetition. So I was listening to someone recently that was talking about one of their personal goals was to get better at writing. And they said
Mhm.
that they learned a tip from some writer that was talking about it in the interview. And he said that one of the things that he did when he first got into writing is he started to identify writers that he thought were excellent writers. And then he
Mhm.
would take some of their work and he would literally just write it out word for word. He would
Yes.
just copy it word for word.
Yeah.
And at
It's
first I thought,
developing
like,
the muscle.
it's developing the muscle and it's also the pattern recognition. And he said,
Mhm.
after he did it over and over again, he would start
Mhm.
writing something of his own from scratch and he would think, oh, well, I noticed that they always use this pattern and they never use
Yeah.
this pattern because it's confusing or it's cumbersome or it's wordy. It's a
Makes
combination of
sense.
seeing the patterns, seeing the relationships, and then that repetition to sort of hone those grooves in your brain of getting those patterns in your brain. So like you said, now you're in a conversation in a meeting and someone asks something and your brain is just on
Yeah.
autopilot, it's seeing patterns and it's saying, well, wait a minute, if you're doing that, this affects this and that affects, and your brain is just very quickly, when you've
Exactly.
done lots of
Yeah.
reps, getting
Yeah.
to something much quicker.
Yeah. But on the
So,
other side, a lot of people's working with templates. What
mm,
templates do, and that's what I also advise everybody. If you actually get into a template, if you really like to have templates, and a lot of people ask me templates all the time, break them. Get them and break them. Break them, deconstruct them, deconstruct them, and try to fix them again. Because if you're
mm,
just putting numbers on a template and expecting the results to be accurate, you're not going to get it. It's impossible to make a template work for several different situations, especially financial
yeah,
modeling. You are doing a model, you'll be able to put it to work. Actually, you actually can reuse your templates to another situation, but only if you know the calculation well, because
if you
there's
under
always going to be a difference on the business or on the business
yeah,
structure or on the business model or on the calculation of something. It's impossible to have if you run across a template that claims to be able to work for everything, it's going to be a very complex one. And my advice to people is not to use
yeah,
complex template, because if you do use, there might be an error that you won't be able to find. It's impossible. If the more
even
complex it is, more prone to errors.
yeah, exactly what you're describing. When I worked in M&A, we had a standard model that we used for doing
Yeah.
valuations. But if you didn't understand the model thoroughly, you didn't know what you needed to change, and then make sure that you changed some of the other things in the model because they were all being affected by that. A simple example would be, maybe we were looking at a retail store. And
Mhm.
so when we were modeling out the revenue, we're doing our revenue ramp up based on opening individual locations and the dynamics of store openings and revenue
Uh,
ramp up and all that. And so you would build that out very specific to retail. But now
mhm.
maybe we're looking at buying a film company that makes movies for theaters, right?
Yes.
Well, they're not opening locations. The
Completely
economics are all
different.
different.
Yeah.
So your
And the
bottom
way
line
they make
revenue,
money is different, the way they cost is different, and everything is
that's what I
different.
was.
So it's impossible.
So if you don't understand how it works, you might go, well, all I need to make sure is that I'm referencing the bottom line revenue number elsewhere in the model. And as
Yeah.
long as I don't break that link, I'm okay. Well, you just mentioned another thing you have to think about. You have to understand I'm modeling my expenses based off of certain things that the revenue triggers.
Yeah.
So if you just take a new person and throw them in and say, here, have at it, and they've
Yeah.
never seen the model before, they're
Yeah.
going to need to spend some time with that model to understand how all of that stuff works together.
Exactly. Especially in M&A, you're putting together two different organizations. You kind of have to understand both and model both before you do an M&A model, to
Yeah.
know the synergies and to see where you can. That's the most complex part, and people don't usually pay a lot of attention to it. And to understand what are the synergies between both companies, and if you are going to able to actually have synergies, and that impacts a lot on the whole transaction. So yeah, it's very
Yeah. That,
important to learn from the ground up, I think.
that reminds me again of the what, so what. So when I first
Yes.
started in M&A and I was doing valuation models, I thought, well, my job is to figure out what the price is that we should pay. That had nothing to do. That was not my job. What I didn't realize is in most transactions, two CEOs get together over drinks and they figure out on the back of a napkin, well,
Yes.
this is your EBITDA last year. We'll give you industry averages 3 to 5 times EBITDA. So we'll
Yeah.
say 4.5 times EBITDA subject to due diligence. That's our number. And in reality, my job was to build a model to back engineer to
Exactly.
fit that valuation, kind of
Yes.
like more of a CYA to cover ourselves to validate that this was in fact a reasonable purchase price.
Yeah.
That was very helpful for me to know because before I realized that, it felt like I was doing things backwards.
Yeah.
So it's important for people to understand what's the purpose of the analysis that you're doing. Um, Let's talk a little bit about the course itself, the tactic financial model, because I see you have a course on Maven. I know a lot of the finance influencers out there have cohort-based courses. Is that what yours on
Mhm.
Maven is?
Yes, yes, it's a cohort-based
Okay.
based course, which I think it's great for the type of knowledge that we want to pass. It's going to be a small group. We're going to go and I'm going to show first each one of the schedules, and then we're going to do it together. And I'll give more examples, more cases I'm developing. So it's exclusive cases. Yesterday, I had a webinar showing how to build scenarios on top of a financial model. And I had an amazing response on the model itself. Everybody wanted to have that model, wanted to see a little more, saw how dynamic and how modular it is, how easy it is to put it together, and how simple actually. But you need to know how to connect it. So I'm developing several cases for the students in their exclusive cases. I used one yesterday on the webinar, but I'm not sharing because this is for the people that are going to be on the course. And I'm very proud of the way I'm developing the cases because those cases, they are very rounded on giving people the opportunity to work with different industries, different business models, and actually going through different problems. Like yesterday, I was showing a cash problem. We're trying to solve a cash problem with the use of scenarios. But there are several different problems that can come up on the models. And so the students will be able to experience a little bit of those problems in the classroom where we can build the cases. And then we will develop a little bit on trying to do real case scenarios, real companies, and trying to go on the stock market and get some listed companies and get their financials and try to model, not trying to recreate the past. And I always say that if you're trying to uh, model a company that already exists, don't try to recreate the past because there's so many things going on, so many things going on with actuals. You're not going to be able to find out everything unless you are inside the company and you have actually the general ledger of the company. Without the general ledger, you're not going to be able to find out all the adjustments. So try to project the next 5 years or the next few quarters and try to model the simplest way you can to begin with. And then you go into developing the understanding of the business structure, how it works, how it makes money, what's the cost, how they do their costing. So you can little by little learn a little more about that company. It can be a company, it can be another industry, it can be a department. I did that with Treasure a few weeks ago. I was trying to learn a little more about Treasure. I have no experience in Treasure. So I was like, can I model transactions and FX effect into the financial model? So I was trying to see and how do they do the models and hedge models and things like that to understand a little more about a department actually inside the company. It doesn't have to be something that you go through a big company and do the model for a big company. You can actually get another business or some type of business in the industry. You're going to gain knowledge and you're going to use financial modeling as a lens to see financial world on a different way. It's going to click for you as soon as you start to build that connection in your head.
So is the majority of the modeling that you're teaching, is it mostly driver-based modeling, or are you using any kind of other?
No,
It sounds like
I'm going to show examples of driver based, but usually I'm just using assumptions and creating the schedules on top of the assumptions.
mhm.
Actually, I follow a little bit the pattern of AFM exam for Financial Modeling Institute. I like the way they do because it's a simple model. You can learn quick and after that, you can develop doing something more complex. If you learn that way, and I like to do the cases sort of like the style that they do. I put a little more complexity. They simplify a little bit for the test. Some of the schedules I go a little bit more complex because I want to show people real case scenarios actually. But if you learn how to do that structure, the way that AFM exam is formulated, then you'll be able to build other complexities, complex transactions and complex business too. So I use that framework. And actually,
Okay.
to be honest, if you go through this course, you might, if you do all the exercises, I'm going to give about 4 to 5 cases. I believe if you finish that and if you're successful in doing those cases, and then you practice for time, because I think the biggest problem with the AFM is time, you might be able to sit for the AFM without no further training. I believe that's enough
Oh, wow.
for you to train for the AFM. That's what I like about this. It gives the structure of the AFM, but then I develop a little more on the finance knowledge.
Well, maybe you can come back down the line in the future after you've had some students go through and we can hear some
Yes,
success
yes, and
stories.
then you
That would be
see.
awesome.
Exactly. That'll be good. I'm going to encourage because I think it's very important to be able to do a certification. It's very, how can I say, uh, recognized worldwide. It's the most, I think it's the most recognized certification. I even put it for people that is going through the course, they will be able to share their badge in LinkedIn. And I'm really proud about it because it's nice to share that you went through a course like that, but I don't intend to be um, as important as the AFM is. So I encourage people to go for a real good certification process like AFM, a
So,
recognized one.
have you looked at the financial modeling skills that are included in the FPAC certification offered by AFP?
No, not yet. I
Okay.
don't have the FP. It's more towards the banking industry, right?
They used to be almost so they used to just offer the CTP for treasury professionals, but I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years ago, they added that FPAC certification just for FP&A professionals.
Oh, that's
I,
interesting.
I know they have a section on financial modeling. It's not the whole
Uh-huh.
focus. They have a
Yeah.
lot of different areas of FP&A. I was just going to ask you if there were things that you could contrast, but that's fine. Um, so I want to make sure that we wrap up because I try to keep this to an hour for both for the audience and for ourselves. We
Sure.
all have other obligations as well. Um, when it comes to the financial modeling, I love the cohort based courses because I think people get so much more out of no matter how great the instructor is, having those other people that are all communicating within
Yes.
that that training session or that training environment, I think adds something to that as well. That's something that I'm looking at putting together for my courses is to have something similar. But I'm curious. I focus a lot on communication skills, and I
Mhm.
just earlier today was teaching a class talking about making complex ideas easy to understand, especially for non-finance people. What percentage of the people that you teach or that you work with would you say are communicating with non-finance people about fairly complex financial ideas on a regular basis?
Well, we all of us, FP&A, we communicate with non-finance people all the time. So it's very important to learn how to make things simple. I think that simplicity is the most important skill that you can develop in financial modeling, in FP&A, in whatever you do, because you are going to explain and you're going to have people buy your idea by making it simple. You need to relate with them. So FP&A is a profession that you need to put that into like every day. It needs to be present into your everyday business because we're talking about other departments with people that they know finance, of course, but you are there to be the bridge between their business and the finance. So you cannot go there and just talk on finance terms. They'll just
Yeah.
zoom out. They won't understand you. So we need to
Yep.
be able to pass and then get their message too through the finance filter and get through the management and board and everything and translate that into numbers. So it's a two-way road actually. You need to be very simple to make it the message go across.
Yeah, and the conundrum there is making things simple is actually hard. The more
Yes,
complicated it is, it sounds almost like it's contradictory.
exactly.
But to make some even think about, if someone asks you to write a summary of a book, the very act of deciding what are the key points,
What's the most important things?
what's the most important things, and how do I communicate it in the smallest number of words, the fewest
Yeah,
words, the smallest words, the shortest sentences, the
yeah,
most simple grammar, and it
yeah,
sounds almost like you're telling people to dumb it down.
yeah.
It's not that at all.
Now,
It's
yeah, when I was a kid, when I was studying, I had a teacher. Contrary to all the other teachers, they gave minimum number of pages. That was easy to do. Minimum numbers of pages is easy to do. But I had a teacher that had maximum number of words. You needed to explain something with maximum number of words. You could not pass that. So it was really hard to be complete and to answer the whole question with the minimal words possible and being concise too. So you need to simplify the theory a lot in your head to be able to put in few words what you need to say. Yeah,
yeah,
and it's the same
I
for
was
financial models.
I kind of came up through the ranks in a world of one pagers where oftentimes my
Yeah,
boss would come into my office and give me a stack like this and say, I need a one pager. Now,
yeah,
thankfully for me, someone had already created a little bit of a template for these are the main things we need to see. I think the easiest example that I like to refer people to is to watch the television show Shark Tank. You ever watch that?
yes, yes, of course.
So it's, I think, a great example of how people are forced to take the entirety of their business idea and
Into a
why the
short, yeah,
sharks should
short speech.
invest in them.
Yeah.
They have to give it in a short pitch. And if you watch that show, you'll see the sharks ask the same few questions
Mm-hmm.
every single time. How much are you looking for? What are you going to use it for? Tell me about the management team. What's your unique selling proposition? What are your margin? It's a very small number of things, but then it also comes down to the company who's pitching their ability to tell that story in a compelling way
Yeah,
because
and
they
the
have to get their
compelling
attention.
part's the hardest one.
Yes, because they have to remember we're all human beings and
Yeah,
we're all wired with emotions. You have to get people's attention first. Then
exactly.
you can give them all the data, all the numbers, all the logic. But if you can come out there and if you notice the sharks will almost always comment on how they brought them in with their initial pitch before they went into all of the details. And it makes a
Exactly.
difference because if you don't, they're
Totally.
just kind of sitting there like blah, like I don't know if I'm really interested.
And they don't retain anything.
Yep.
You need to be sure because you want to make sure they just get the summary and they will retain it. Yeah,
Yep.
that's true. Makes
Well, I
sense.
think this is a good place to wrap up. Tell us what is the best way for people to find you and to find your course?
Best way to find me is LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. My course is on Maven. You can find the link in my LinkedIn page or my website. It's carolinalago.com. Um,
Simple.
and you can find very easy. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's the best place to find me. I also have a newsletter if people are not ready yet to go through the course. I teach a lot in the newsletter. It's called the Tactical Room and it goes out weekly on Fridays. Yes. And it's on my LinkedIn too. All the links are there.
All right. And we'll put that in the show notes.
Perfect.
So I highly encourage you, if you're not following Carolina, you put out a lot of free content, not just your newsletter, but I notice you post on LinkedIn pretty frequently and you have good
Yeah.
content there. So there's lots of stuff where people can get a flavor for the things that you
Yes.
teach before jumping into the full course, which you'll have available on Maven. Caroline, I
Yes.
want to thank you for spending your time with us here today, sharing your knowledge and your background. And for everyone, check her out on LinkedIn and on her Maven course. And we'll see you next time on the FP&A Fast Track.
Thank you, John.